Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second Friends of Perth and Kinross Archive talk of the season. Thank you so much for joining us. To save a bit of faffing around with screen sharing, I'm giving the welcome this evening on behalf of the French chairman, Prue Dowie. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Sarah Wilcock, and I'm the Assistant Archivist at the Perth and Kinross Archive. Now, just before I introduce our speaker, I wanted to make you aware that we had some technical issues in providing the talk this evening, and the only workaround that we had was to pre-record the talk. Everything appears to be in working order, and your experience shouldn't be affected in any way, but just to make you aware of that, and that's the reason why you won't see our speaker during the presentation. Our speaker this evening is Conservator Hazel Davier from the National Records of Scotland. Hazel joined the Scottish Record Office, now the National Records of Scotland, in 1994 after leaving Camberwell College of Arts. During her time in the archives, she continued to study, first obtaining the Certificate in Archive Conservation with the Society of Archivists, and then a Master's in Preventive Conservation with Northumbria University. She has close connections with Perth, as it is her hometown, and she has assisted the Perth and Kinross Archive in a preservation survey and with conservation advice in the past. Hazel has joined us this evening, as you will see, and she will be available to take questions at the end of the presentation. If you do have a question for Hazel, could you please write it in the chat box, and I will read the questions out during the Q&A at the end. So that is enough from me. We will now play the presentation. Enjoy.
Hi, first I'd like to say thank you to the Friends of the Archives for asking me to give this talk, and to Sarah for all her help with the technical side of things. My name is Hazel Davier, and I work in the National Records of Scotland as a book and paper conservator specialising in parchment and seal conservation. Today, the intention is to provide you with a little glimpse into the world of conservation within an archive, what we actually get up to and what comes under our remit. I've selected a few items that I've worked on, specifically looking at the local area with the current audience in mind. Hopefully, some of it will be of interest. First, a wee bit about the institution we know as the National Records of Scotland, or how we name it, NRS. The NRS takes under one cover the following disparate bodies: the National Archives of Scotland, the Registers of Scotland, Census and Statistics. NRS currently has 4 storage repositories, 3 of which are central Edinburgh sites, one of which, Thomas Thomson House, is on the western edge of the city. Accessions can add around 1,000 metres per year, and many of our challenges come from having Grade A listed buildings which in themselves require preservation. The National Records of Scotland has one of the most varied collections of archives in the British Isles, and it is the main archive for sources of the history of Scotland as a separate kingdom, her role in the British Isles, and the links between Scotland and many other countries over the centuries. Many records were lost as a result of being taken out of the country, first in the 13th century by Edward I during the Wars of Independence, and later by Oliver Cromwell in the 17th century. As a result, the earliest surviving Scottish public record is the Quitclaim of Canterbury of 1189, and the oldest private record is a charter by David I to the Church of St Cuthbert in Edinburgh 1127. Our current collections include registers of births, deaths, marriages, divorces, civil partnerships, dissolutions and adoptions, Scottish government records from the 12th century to the present day, records created by courts of law, churches, businesses, landed estates and other corporate bodies. We have the Scottish Census, as I've mentioned, and the National Health Service Central Register. For those of you who haven't seen inside an archive storage area, this is just to give you an idea of what they look like. This one is in our most modern building, Thomas Thomson House. And this is the conservation studio based at Thomas Thomson House. We work as a team of 9 fully trained and qualified conservators, and as you can see, we work in a bright, spacious and well-equipped studio. We moved into the building in 1994, and at the time it represented a major improvement to the working environment of professional conservators, having been designed with input from the conservation team. It's north-facing with UV-filtered windows and specialist lighting, which is helpful as we're all getting a bit older. Until then, we'd been struggling in the basement of General Register House with insufficient light and cramped working conditions. Although the archives has had a conservation department of sorts for many years, used to be called the repair department, Robert Adam hadn't really planned a space for us. Here are what I would view as the main aims of a conservator. Conservators are trained professionals who combine scientific and craft skills mixed with a knowledge of history to conserve the objects and preserve them in a sensitive and appropriate approach. But what do we actually do? We're responsible for the collection's care of the entire contents of the archive. It's essential when holding a collection of national importance or local importance to have an individual or a team with specialist knowledge to care for the objects and help preserve them, not only for us but for future generations. This care can be quite wide-reaching across the organisation, working with various departments and individuals to achieve the desired outcome. This will include preventive conservation, which is a multidisciplinary approach that aims to minimise the risk to collections by managing and monitoring their immediate environment within our repositories. This will include controlling temperature, relative humidity, monitoring dust, pest management, and even vibration. We're also responsible for the packaging and physical protection of the items. We carry out interventive repairs on the collections to make them safe to handle and access. This helps fulfil search room requests, but also supports exhibitions and projects undertaken by colleagues. This can involve conservation and repair of books, paper, vellum, parchment, maps and plans, seals, and photographic material. Interventive or remedial conservation involves the use of chemical and physical treatments, such as washing, deacidification, structural repair, consolidation, and reconstruction to stabilise actively deteriorating items. Every item that we work on, we produce a condition report for prior to conservation and include our treatments. We also take before and after photographs and make a list of the materials used, the number of items worked on, and even include the time spent on the conservation of the piece. We also undertake conservation condition surveys, which are essential for identifying and mitigating any problems prior to collections coming into our archive storage. We use these surveys to also inform us of treatment plans and programmes, and even sometimes carry these out for outside organisations. We have a disaster response team, which are trained in treating damaged items in an emergency situation, such as a flood or fire. We are on call to help when something goes wrong within our own organisation and with others, for example, the Glasgow School of Art fire. We conserve and prepare and install items for exhibition within the office and those on loan to other organisations. We also provide regular training events for our staff and engage with the wider archive conservation world and associated societies. And rather unusually, we create seals for the letters patent, charters and commissions, but we will look at this a little later. So when we start looking at an item, what do we need to know? Where has the item come from? Its storage, ownership, has it been exhibited? Is it a new acquisition? Does the object's history explain its condition? What is it made from? We can't treat anything until we know what it's created from. Is the deterioration linked to age and chemical breakdown of the object? What's wrong with it? Can it be handled safely or exhibited? Does the conservation issue only affect that specific object? Or is the problem with an object a symptom of a larger issue that may affect other parts of your collection? Is there any obvious cause for the damage? And what can we do to reverse it or stop it? These questions help us reflect the balance between remedial treatments and preventive treatments in the care of collections. The image here is of a Burgess ticket of Perth in favour of King Charles II on the 24th of July, 1650. All the tapes have broken and have been tied, and this is because they're made of silk, which becomes very brittle over time. The middle tape has a flat metal thread through it, and due to the level of discoloration of the metal, it would suggest that it's a silver or silver alloy thread. The document is written on calfskin and the light-coloured ink iron-gall ink with gold illumination on the capital letters. Silk is inherently acidic, but the parchment is alkaline. The ink is acidic, and again, the parchment is still alkaline. So all these items chemically fight against each other, which can cause problems. But conservation isn't always metallic threads and gold illumination. The caption says it all, really. These volumes were damaged, damp and mouldy, and had traces of human excrement on them. Here the volumes are being wrapped in cling film before being deep frozen, and the next move was to dry the volumes out, clean off the loose dirt with a soft brush, and further cleaning as required with a chemical sponge, and then denaturing any mould using industrial alcohol. And I have to say, fortunately, I was off that day. Now let's look at some objects. Most of what I will show you I've worked on recently or are specifically related to the area, such as your city seal. And when I say recently, I am afraid I mean before lockdown. This is a technical drawing of the bridge over King Street, Perth, and it came from the Scottish Central Railway. So what are the problems with this? Well, as you can see, it's very, very dirty, which makes it difficult for the reader to handle and for the staff. It's not great for the desks and it's bad for the object. We often see these things with this level of soot when they have been stored near open fires and in the times of more industrial processes. Also, there's a fair amount of physical damage which comes from poor handling and storage in the past. The pH of the paper is low, which makes it more brittle. It's about 4.5 here. It's written in ink with colour washes in blue and orange and an orangey red, and there's some graphite annotation. It's produced on a Whatman cream-coloured handmade wove paper with the watermark saying 1847. The plan has been rolled and there's large loose fragments, several losses and large tears. Now, this was required by the search room for viewing, and this is what we would normally class as unfit for production. Hence, we would need to work on it. This is the plan in the middle of treatment. It has been surface cleaned with a brush and then cleaned with a chemical sponge and a razor. It's been washed and then deacidified using calcium hydroxide, and it's then been lined with a Japanese paper and infills of a thicker Japanese paper with wheat starch paste used as an adhesive. Now it's dried upon this vertical light box, which is what we refer to as our wallboard, so that we can actually see what we're doing and how we can align the tears and replace any missing parts. And it's left like this to dry. The plan was then removed from the wallboard and repairs trimmed. The original labels that have been removed from the verse of the plan have been readhered in their original position, and it can now be stored flat. We use both types of storage, both rolled and flat, but when items are smaller, it's better if they are kept flat, and it's now ready for access. Not all jobs require such level of intervention. I'm sure most of you will recognise this charter as the charter by King William, King of Scots, from around 1172 to 1184, held here in the archives in Perth. This charter has a rather unusual seal attachment and is attached with 4 blue and green silk-covered cords with a hemp core. There appears to be a pattern on the silk cords with a white-coloured thread. The threading goes through the foot of the document and is likely to have been partially tampered with, as the seal has been previously repaired, as you can see here, and the threads are broken in places. Silk is very brittle by nature, which I've already mentioned. The first cord is broken within the silk and only being held together with the silk wrapping. The second is intact, and the third is almost entirely detached, holding on by one silk thread. The fourth cord is completely broken. The handling of this item seriously endangers the attachment of the seal. so preservation packaging was carried out to preserve the seal attachment. Grey LD45 plastisol, which is a polyethylene foam, is cut to the shape of the document and is fitted into an archival box. It looks a bit like a pizza box. This enables the item to be seen, but without actually handling it. It's a quick and cheap way to give the seal some extra support, but without interfering with the object. We do sometimes reverse old repairs. This Perth charter had a very poor quality seal repair, but more importantly had stitching to secure the tag attachment, and the seal was becoming detached. The old repairs were reversed and new parchment repairs were carried out using both calfskin and sheepskin. We no longer repair seals with excess wax, which makes them look a bit like a toffee penny, and we try to keep repairs to the minimum. Now, I'm sure that you know that this is an important document for the archive here in Perth, but it's also an interesting document for me, and that's not just because I'm from Perth, but it's the only one that I've ever worked on that has appeared on a cake. As mentioned before, within our conservation department, we append the Great Seal of Scotland onto letters, patents, commissions and charters. This started at the beginning of the Scottish Parliament when we received the first letters patent for storage, and we were rather surprised to see a large purple rubber seal appended. Rubber, as we know, has a very limited lifespan, so we suggested this may not be the best way to do things. Unfortunately, we were a victim of our own success, and now we have the honour of applying all these seals, but using traditional materials and methods. We use Scottish beeswax coloured with mercuric sulphide, which is vermilion, with no other additives. Colophony was used in the past, but it can make the seal brittle, so we have chosen not to use it. This is an image of the matrix of the Great Seal of Scotland, and I just wanted to show this to you so you have an idea of what it actually looks like and the item that we use to create the seal itself. It's incredibly heavy and quite difficult to manage. We look after it on behalf of the Registers of Scotland, and it stays with us most of the time, but it does go out for special outings, say when the Scottish Parliament reopens. And here you can see the molten wax being poured into the matrix. We tried many different ways of doing this at the start, but this proved to be better than trying to soften large discs of wax to be pressed into the matrix, which is the way it would have been done. The tape is then carefully laid across the reverse portion and positioned. We then make sure the wax is set in the obverse section and add a little more molten wax. Then the two pieces are united, and we wait till the temperature drops. The rather nerve-wracking part is separating the matrix and popping out the newly formed seal, because it doesn't always work to plan. And as you can see, I'm finally smiling after a very grim face in some of these pictures. And here is the finished article. We remove the excess wax and we give it a little polish, and then we box it in the same method as we've already discussed. And now for a book. This is a church book from the Parish of Kirkmaiden, Kirk Session, and its minutes dated from 1716 to 1742. And although from the outside of this book it looks to be in not too bad condition, a closer look reveals more. It's bound in full leather in what's referred to as a flexible binding. The boards have beautiful blind tooling with lines and floral borders in a traditional style contemporary with the date. The leather is a little bit skinned on both boards and corners, and the spine leather is cracking. The first and last sections of the paper are very soft along the foredge, resulting in losses and tears, and it's probably a result of damp damage. The main area of the textbook is sound though, and there's a little area missing on the boards inside as well, and we'll see this in a minute. So this is how it looks on the inside, and it shows the extent of the damage and the damage to the sewing structure. Several sections have become detached, and damp damage has softened the paper to such an extent that it's breaking down and the leather is lifting. The first and second sections are totally detached. The next two are no longer sewn around the cords, as the cords are pulling away from the text block. And the last section of the volume is totally detached, and much of the paste downs, which are part of the end papers, are missing. Here we can see the total detachment of the backboard, the loss of end papers, and what looks like a bit of insect infestation. There is frass residue along the spine area, which is otherwise known as insect poo. The turn-ins of the leather are lifting, and none of the cords are still attached to the backboard. They've all broken. And some of the kettle stitch, which is the stitch near the head and the tail, are broken, but the rest of the sewing is strong. So what do we do with this? Now some images of the work in process. Quite a bit of work has been done at this stage, and this is the back of the volume. All the loose sections and damaged paper had been removed from the binding, and the damaged papers were wet treated and repaired. It's not always a good option to only treat some pages this way and not take down the whole book. But they were too badly damaged to leave, but I also didn't want to pull the whole book and lose the original sewing structure entirely. I also wanted to keep the original cords attached to the front of the book. So once the repairs were carried out, the pages were sewn back in with the original sewing supports extended at the back of the book. You can see in the second photograph the new cords going through the original holes in the board. This image just shows the repair to the back corner of the board, which is infilled using pulp. The pulp was made of flax, cotton linters and esparto, and the esparto was added for its softer characteristics, which helps it feel more like the original board. We don't use any adhesive for doing this, and the adhesion is purely relying on the hydrogen bonding within the paper. And then new calfskin was applied to the corner here. And this is the volume after conservation. Hopefully you'll be able to see that it's retained a lot of its integrity. The outside of the volume looks very similar to how it was when it started, although now it is structurally sound and can be accessed and used by a reader, or it could be digitally imaged, or it could be exhibited. This is the inside of the volume after conservation, showing the textual repairs and the new end papers. This little photograph at the end, which looks a little odd, is not very clear, but I've included it to show that whatever a conservator removes from an object is kept. Frequently, it's not possible to reuse damaged cords or threads, or in this case, the end papers, but whatever we cannot use is kept with the item. Often when disbinding a book, we can find things like drying sand or even quill trimmings in the gutter. All of this is kept with the item. Quills can be very exciting to find, and sometimes we find entire quills with feathers, but mostly it's just the trimmings, which unfortunately look a little bit like toenails. Here's a rather nice document on handmade antique laid paper that is a royal letter appointing Sir Duncan Campbell as Justice in that part for preservation of the deer in the forest of Mamlorn, Killin in Perthshire, where he was the keeper. It's dated the 27th of May, 1613. Now, the problem with this is that it had been formally repaired with a method called windowing out, which involves putting machine-made paper round the outside of the document. This creates stresses and strains within the centre of the document and can create further damage. As you can see here, we're about to lose a fragment of an area where it's very, very soft. One thing that's rather nice about this is that there's seal transfer at the top of the sheet where the document has been closed when the seal was still soft, creating this lovely extra impression. You can also see the laid lines and chain lines of the paper in this image. And it has been hand stamped with the King's signature. Hand stamping was done from late medieval times onwards. Clerks were sometimes allowed to use a stamp bearing the monarch's signature to save the trouble of getting signatures for routine warrants. Old repairs were removed from the document, and it underwent aqueous treatments and then repair with Japanese paper, and gelatin was used for an adhesive this time. We used gelatine with this type of document when it's written in iron gall ink, as it helps stabilise and prevent the free iron 2 ions moving throughout the paper and causing corrosion. This is a close-up of the badly damaged area now, and this document can now be accessed in the search room. This is the register of the Priory of St Andrews, covering charters dating from 1144 to 1438. It's part of the Earl of Dalhousie collection, which was held in the archives on gift and deposit for many years and finally purchased in 2007. The volume itself dates from the 13th century with 14th century folios and some later additions. It's one of Scotland's earliest cartulary manuscripts and an example of an active manuscript with substantial additions. It comes from the historically significant St Andrew's Cathedral in the Middle Ages, which is the premier episcopal seat of the kingdom. This volume became part of a project funded by the Royal Society of Edinburgh looking at Scotland's cartulary manuscripts. This has been cross-discipline research with Glasgow University, National Library of Scotland and the NRS, looking at how the manuscripts were used, the history of production, how we should digitise them now, analytical research, and our approach to conservation and preservation of these items. On these 2 pages, you can see some of the examples of the pigments that are within the volume. There's quite a lot of red, 2 different types really, but this one is likely to be vermilion, and the blue you see is likely to be azurite. There is some strike through of the blue pigment, which means that you can see an image of the letter on the reverse. And this indicates that it's composed of a basic copper carbonate. Some of the iron and gall inks are also exhibiting a bluish hue strike through, which would indicate that they also have a higher copper content than maybe is normal with some iron gall inks. Most of the colours would appear to be quite stable, however, and there's also some rather attractive doodles throughout the book. On the first image, you can also see the pricking holes down the side, which were for ruling the sheets to enable the scribe to write neatly. Unfortunately, not all of the volume is in good condition. Although the text block has been rebound, including a hollow back, there are some restrictions in the opening, which are increased by the natural undulations in the sheepskin and also by the application of gallitannic acid to the inked areas. This gallitannic acid was used by the curators in many large organisations within the UK, and it was applied over inked areas to increase the contrast of the writing. I'm not really quite sure. It seems to have been haphazardly applied, in many areas. And maybe at the time it increased the writing, but these areas that it's been used on wouldn't appear to have required it. What's happened is over the years, this darkens and causes this dark staining that we see and creates a great deal of brittleness and inflexibility in the skin as the skin becomes gelatinized and those collagen fibers break down in their flexibility. There's also creasing evident in the gutter due to the volume undergoing the backing process, which it wouldn't have had originally. This is what the binders have done when they rebound the volume. In some areas, the text goes directly into the gutter, which means that the digitizing of the volume would be very difficult in its current state because you wouldn't be able to read all the writing and all the information couldn't be recorded. The tight binding also means it's not possible to do a collation, and therefore it's not possible to go through analysis of the manuscript's textual and physical history. Some of the skin is very thin in areas with this application of the gallitannic acid and the weakening of the skin, and so it's resulted in tears, as we can see from the images, and brittleness. And it's mainly due to this that this volume is currently not fit for production, as these pages are so vulnerable and are likely to be damaged further and potential loss could occur. Also, the discoloration of these pages means that the current surrogate microfilm is not ideal and that some pages are unreadable. There are printed transcriptions of these charters, but they don't give all the information required by researchers, such as section makeup that can be obtained by accessing the original. This volume was requested for display just after the research project had finished, but unfortunately this was before we had time to actually do any work on it. Before we can lend or display items, we need to be sure that they're not going to be damaged by the process. When pigments are involved, this can be more difficult as light exposure can affect colour changes. One of the tools that we use is microfading, which is a non-destructive technique. We don't have a microfading tool ourselves, so we work collaboratively with the National Galleries of Scotland. Microfading testing is a highly accelerated form of light exposure, millions of lux. It is a semi-quantitative risk assessment tool rather than predictive, therefore observations of works on display continues to be important. The most important information microfading provides is the relative light fastness of colorants. That is, a colorant assessed as 5 times less light fast than another, for example, is displayed proportionately less. Lighting guidelines will be adjusted up or down as research results come in. As I say, it's non-destructive and leaves no damage. And this image here will show you the layout of what happens during the process. Many pigments were tested throughout the volume and most showed very little change, except for this one here. The orange-red showed a very dramatic result, close to what we refer to as blue wool 1 fading, which is very bad. Due to this, the light budget for this book would be incredibly limited. If we were to lend it for the duration of the exhibition, which in this case was 4 months, we could not use it as an organisation or access it or display it for another 9 years. Due to such a dramatic colour change with the orange-red pigment and such a risk of it darkening, we decided that we could not justify displaying this book and so chose not to lend it on this occasion. So that solved one problem, but the only other problem is now that I have actually got to still conserve it. My other current project is this document, which I'm sure many of you may recognise as the Declaration of Arbroath, dated 1320. The National Records of Scotland is currently preparing for the postponed 700th anniversary display of the Declaration of Arbroath that was to be in March to April 2020 in conjunction with the National Museums of Scotland. Unfortunately, along with so many other things in our lives, this was cancelled due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but plans are now underway for the rescheduled exhibition. The exhibition at the National Museums of Scotland will be the first time the Declaration has been seen in public since 2005, when it was on display at the Scottish Parliament. Here are 2 images of the Declaration before and after treatment, and you can see in the second one it sits in a custom mount, and this is actually the mount that the Declaration permanently lives in while it's in its special case within the storeroom. In the first photograph, you will see that the tags are twisted and in many cases torn. One seal was totally detached and many others at risk of becoming so. Repairs were carried out mostly to the tags to secure them and some minimal seal repair. The tags were so very fragile and thin that I used a technique using remoistenable tissue, which is tissue that's coated with gelatin or isinglass adhesive, allowed to dry, and then you slightly remoisten it to apply the repair. These repairs had to be reassessed for the document going on display again. Unfortunately, the document has required further work due to inevitable degradation that all organic objects succumb to. Due to the very lightweight repairs that I did, there have been some problems also with the delamination of textile areas near an old repair. As you can see where the very white parchment area is of the infill that was done many years ago in the past. In those areas where the document has had damp damage, some of the actual textile areas are now delaminating and they had to be consolidated. This has taken up a great deal of time with planning. We even plan the actual route that the document travels when it leaves the building, the route it travels in the van, where it goes in the museum, to avoid as much vibration, for instance, as possible, because again, as I say, it's very, very fragile. A great deal of documentation has to be carried out and doing risk assessments. It has had to have a new condition report, which is about 67 pages long and quite frankly, possibly the longest one I've ever written. But we also think about how we pack it, how we handle it when we arrive in the museum, how it will be placed into the case. We have to think about the lighting. the environment within the case and surrounding it, any photography guidelines for the press. All of these things need a great deal of consideration and take quite a long time to draw up. But hopefully you will all get to see it quite soon. And here is another exhibition that I've been working on. It's called Elizabeth and Mary, Royal Cousins, Rival Queens, and it's held within the British Library, which is open now until February. We've contributed some documents and a volume from our extensive collections to this excellent exhibition, and includes this letter, which is circa 1560, probably the last from Mary, Queen of Scots in France, to her mother before her death, written in her own hand. And the other pictured here is a holograph letter from Elizabeth I to John Erskine, the first Earl of Mar, dated around 1571. What is really interesting here about these two letters, and one of the reasons I wanted to show them, is that they both show what we refer to as evidential cuts in the paper, which are probably more visible in the Elizabeth letter because they're very large down the side. These were used to letter lock the item with slips of paper that were part of the document to make it secure from prying eyes. So it sort of worked like an envelope. We have quite a lot of examples of these, but they tend to be on royal letters. You can't really see it as clearly on the Mary letter here. For those of you that are interested in letter locking, there's a fascinating website here that will show you different examples of how it was carried out. And there's even a YouTube video here which will show you how you could even do it yourself if you're interested. And if you're down in London, the exhibition would be well worth a visit. But if not, here is a little preview of how it looked just before the opening. When we think of archive collections, we tend to think of manuscript paper items, volumes, seals, parchments, photographs, plans, many of the things that we've looked at today. But within many archives, there's other material, not what we would traditionally think of as archive material. There are objects. Within the NRS, we have an objects collection that is about 800 pieces that contains a wide variety of types of material, from items relating to court processes to human hair kept as mementos. The court process material we have dates up to about the 1920s. Court material now, evidence, is generally destroyed or returned to the owner, so we no longer receive it, although we sometimes still get things in from sheriff court processes. These provide different challenges as they can require different handling, packaging, and environmental conditions. For example, we have many murder weapons covered with blood that have corroded. These require specialist storage to prevent further corrosion to themselves or damage to other things, and we also wish to retain any evidence that might still be there. Many of these objects mustn't be handled or touched. We also have objects that relate to our organisation, which are, rather nice. We have candles that were used in the search room. We have the top hat from the doorman for General Register House. So it's nice that we have things that relate to the archives and the records that they came with, but we also have things that relate to our organisation and the history of it. So here are a couple of examples from our collection. One, the bottle, is the most recent acquisition that came in just before lockdown, with a series that came from the Scottish Prison Service, includes items from Perth Prison. This is an image of a glass bottle that measures 8 inches by 2.5 inches from 1944. And I don't know if you can read the label, or you would wish to, but it was removed by the prison doctor from a prisoner's rectum. Conservation has many surprises, and unfortunately I will have to look forward to packaging this on my return to the office. The other is a 2-pronged fork from the case against Lieutenant Hugh Fraser in Inverness Sheriff Court. On Christmas Eve in 1789, Fraser was visiting an aunt in Inverness with his wife, and during the evening he noticed that another guest, Colonel Simon Fraser, was paying a little bit too much attention to his wife. Having suspected that they were having an affair, Hugh Fraser took a fork, which he already had in his pocket, and aimed it at the Colonel's eye, that which was entire, the Colonel having lost the other formally. The case was dropped, and Simon Fraser survived the attack, with his sight intact cataract in his one eye. So as you can see, there's some great stories with these objects, and they can make the day a little more challenging and interesting. Well, I hope this has given you a brief glimpse into the extremely varied world of the Conservator, and I thank you again for listening.
Thank you so much for that, Hazel. That was so fascinating. I was absolutely enthralled with it all. Even working in archives, I had no comprehension of just how detailed and involved conserving our records are. So that was really great. Thank you so much. If anybody has any questions for Hazel, please do pop them into the chat box, and I can ask them to her. But while I give you all a second to sort of digest what you've just heard and think of any questions if you have them, I do have a start-off question, Hazel. And we've both actually come from arts backgrounds and both ended up in archives, but what was it that drew you down the conservation route?
I don't know if I'm frozen. Can you hear me? I don't know.
Yes, I can hear you fine. Yeah.
I think the screen's frozen. I've always been interested in books and collected them when I was younger. I wanted to study the classics, actually, and it was quite difficult doing Latin and Greek at school, and I had to go out and fetch books and find them in antiquarian bookshops. And so that's what I chose to study. So when I went to Camberwell, I did actually study paper conservation. So it was from the off, which is quite unusual. A lot of people come to it as a second career. One of our conservators worked as a social worker for 30 years before he decided to go to Northumbria and become a paper conservator. Complete, career change. But it does attract people from all sorts of different backgrounds.
Great, thank you. So Susan Barnard just said thank you for these fascinating insights into your work. And Ishbel McKinnon has asked, what is the most challenging record that you have been involved in treating?
Bizarrely, I suppose challenges come in different ways, and sometimes it's due to the format or what they are or what they're required for. One, I worked in a parliamentary record, a 15th century parliamentary record that was on parchment that had been in a fire, and it had shrunk all around the edges and congealed and stuck together. And to actually had to separate that was incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And it involved a more chemical process route that I wouldn't normally like to go down, but it was quite fun and interesting to do. And that was definitely challenging in a very unusual way. Also, I would say I once got to work on an address book that had been dug out of the ground and had been found on a corpse.
Oh.
I know, really bizarre, really different, and very challenging because it came to us from Aberdeen, and the forensics lab couldn't do anything with it because all the pages had blocked and had stuck together. So it arrived in a box covered in live maggots. And I was just like, oh my, I had never experienced anything like this. But it was, yes, it was very challenging. It was different to work on, especially because it had a lot of modern inks, which are obviously water soluble. So, I had to separate this block textbook. But no, it was good because it actually helped them catch the killer and it helped solve a crime. So it was all, it's terribly different and exciting. So I get very, very different from working on a medieval record.
Yeah. Oh, that's really, really interesting. Thank you for that. Margaret Borland-Stroyan has asked, what is Japanese paper?
Well, we choose to use Japanese paper because it's a handmade paper, generally always handmade paper. And the one we use mostly is made from kozo fibres, which is a sort of reed. And it is farmed in the winter and it's produced in a very traditional manner. And it's got very, very long fibres and they don't size it. So you probably maybe have seen it in some art shops or you've maybe seen it and not realised it. We have a very high grade that we get made. We've even got paper that is made specifically to our specifications that we use and that we buy directly from Japan There are a few people that still make this, and there really isn't anywhere else to get it. And it works in a very different way to Western paper. So that's why we choose to use it, because it's more flexibility and better strength and qualities. You can build it up in layers, and it's very useful. We do use Western paper for repairs, and especially for end papers. Sometimes for larger infills, the Western paper works better and looks nicer. But we tend to use Japanese papers.
Thank you. Michael has asked, how does the training or technique sharing work for conservation, considering you seem to have such a broad knowledge of everything from chemistry to practical techniques?
I wish my chemistry was stronger, I have to say. I think most people get attracted to it probably from an art background, or a craft background, or an interested in history, having a history interest. So it is quite challenging. Every conservator will have areas that they're maybe not as strong on. And we're lucky because we've got such a large team that, we have people that specialize in, they've done a chemistry course, for instance, they've done a master's in science, for instance, for conservation, which is incredibly useful. So you can have different people to pull on. We have some people that work just on paper. They've just done, say, flat art training, so they will work on documents and maps and plans and maybe photographs. We have other people like myself who've worked in a lot of books and parchment and seals and a more archive background training. So it actually is quite multidisciplinary. But yes, everybody has their strengths and weaknesses, and people tend to kind of go off in a direction that suits them and hopefully use the skills that they have.
Great. Yeah, it's good that everybody can kind of work collaboratively.
It's one really nice thing about being in a big studio, that we can do that. We can bounce ideas off each other, and we work we've got a very international team. We've got people from Italy, from Spain, from Japan. We've had people from Germany, the Czech Republic. So there's people that have trained all over the world. So they have slightly different skills and techniques they may have learned. So it's great for sharing.
Yeah, and presumably as well, it's very similar to the archive network, where you've got a worldwide network to call upon.
Yes, it is, exactly. And we don't know all the conservators, but there's not that many of us. And so, if you don't know someone, you'll know someone who knows someone that'll be able to help you with your question. And people like to share techniques and discuss things and help out. So yes, exactly.
Thank you. Colin McLeod has asked, how are you prioritising digitisation and uploading images to the web? The past 18 months has shown how vital it is to be able to see material online.
It is, and it is always a priority, and has become more so, definitely. I mean, since I started, my goodness, there was still photocopying going on. Can you believe it? I remember putting great big stickers on packaging saying "Do not photocopy" when it was parchment, for instance. So yes, it absolutely increasingly so is becoming even more of a priority. The difficulty is the digitisation unit. There are a few people in, but it's not back up and running fully, and we're not back in the studio. I have been allowed back in to do some of the letters patents so that we have our new COVID laws, for instance. And I've been in to do the exhibition for the British Library that was previously agreed, but the studio isn't open. We've got some people in checking stores and checking items going into the search room, but at the moment we're not back up and running. So that does hinder digitisation to some degree. There's no doubt about that. But the archivists work very hard in finding, material that can be done and different projects, and the cameras, are in use. But we're really not back up to speed yet. But he's absolutely right. It is vital that we, keep it. Online access has changed definitely over the years, and we have to keep providing that. But there are cataloguing issues, if I'm honest, as well. Not everything is fully catalogued, and you can't. Forget about the condition. You can't image if things aren't catalogued, if things aren't paginated. And then we come along and say, well, that's going to be difficult because of the condition or because it's too dirty. And so a lot of things do need to be looked at. And we want to give the readers the best quality image we can. Like I was saying with the St Andrews Cartillery, the microfilm that exists is just of too poor a quality to actually be any use. So we want to provide the best we can, otherwise it isn't a surrogate. Yeah. And what we do tend to find is the more surrogates we provide, it encourages people to want to see the original. It doesn't prevent it. It actually brings in more interest, and people say, well, I want to see the watermarks, or I want to get other different types of information that you can't get from a digital image. So it is very important to have those images and keep the system running, but also physical access is still very important, I believe.
Yeah, it is very, very important. That seems to be something that pops up quite a lot, is people saying, well, why don't you just digitize things? And they seem to forget that there's an object there as well, and that we get so much information off of that object, not just the textual information.
Yes, there's people interested in all different aspects of an item, and I think that's where conservators come from, is we're interested in the physical item, how it's made, what it was used for, how it was used, and there are a lot of people out there that it's not just the textual story that the item tells us.
Yeah, but as you say as well, that creating that digital surrogate is a sort of access point and an open door to bringing people to see the original object.
Yes, absolutely. And we're all there. We do support access as much as we can and try and help as much as we can.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. I've got another question from Ishbel. A conservator's work is so diverse. What are your most and least favourite aspects of the role?
You never know what you're going to get. Sometimes it can be exciting. It can be different. You can go in one day and then there's a call from somewhere who needs your help, and you literally get and fill up the car with disaster supplies and drive off and help rescue someone's collection, which is always wonderful to get there in time, because time is really, really of the essence. I mean, sometimes it can be very disappointing if someone calls and they say, well, we've had a leak. We say, okay, when? Oh, it was about 5 weeks ago. And you go, oh, because you know what's coming. Well, we thought it was all fine, but it's all black and moldy and damaged. And, so then that is very disappointing, because if you got the call at the right time, you could have been there to save a collection. I can be very repetitive. If you're working on a large book, and every single page needs to be mechanically cleaned and dry cleaned and paginated, and then every single phytage, if it, you need to take it down, it then needs to be washed perhaps. Then every single page might need deacidification or phytate treatment for the inks. It's for every single one. After a while it can become a little tedious, and repetitive, because you're doing the same thing over and over again, say 500 times. But it's nice when you get it all back together again. It can be a bit like pulling an engine apart, and you have a moment where you think, oh dear, hope this all goes back together. And then it always does, but you do sometimes think, oh gosh, I hope this works out. But and that's very satisfying. So it can, as I say, it can be very dirty as well. So we shouldn't say archives are dirty. I know we're not supposed to say that, and of course they're always clean.
Yeah,
but no, they're not. And you can come home absolutely filthy sometimes.
Yeah, especially if they've been pulled off a dead body.
Well, yes, yeah. That I have to say, it's only happened once. I did go into work once and open my drawer and find that somebody left a cutthroat razor in my drawer, in no packaging, nothing, covered in blood and hair. And I was like, oh goodness me, somebody could have warned me.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think that's all the questions finished, so we'll just finish up there. Thank you so much, Hazel. That talk was amazing. It was so fascinating. And thank you very much for including some Perth-related items. I know that you must have so many amazing items within your care, so thank you very much for choosing a few Perthshire options. I have to say, I do love that the letters patent that you made us for the City 2012 Charter. I do love opening that box, because you can still smell the beeswax coming off of that. So it's Scottish wax. It's from East Lothian, actually. It's a company in East Lothian that provide it for us. So it's even, it doesn't travel very far. So we try to use local materials if we can as well. So it's not all Japan and things. But yes, I actually specifically asked to do the Perth commission. So I've got to do that one. Yeah, well, it smells lovely every time I open that box.
That's why I did it.
No, thank you very much. Yes, so thank you once again for agreeing to do the talk this evening. It was brilliant. Thank you so much. Just before everybody leaves, that's our talks finished for the 2021 year, but we will be back in 2022. Laura Haggerty from Inner Perthshire Library will be giving the next talk to us. Her talk will be titled Inner Perthshire, a Living Library, and that will be held on Thursday, the 17th of February 2022 at 6:30 p.m. And it will be another Zoom-only event. So that just leaves me once again to say thank you very much, Hazel. Thank you very much for everybody attending, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening. Thank you and goodbye.